welcome to our breakout session, How to Get Started, Clarity on Your Career Transition. And I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Sarah Adams. So Sarah is a data analyst and visualization specialist, excuse me, at UVA's Curry School of Education and Human Development, and is also a part-time virtual student in UVA's Masters of Data Science program. Sarah has 7 years of experience in academic research within neuroscience, which I love because my daughter-in-law does the same thing, cognitive behavioral sciences, and education. And in her pre-COVID free time, Sarah was an improv artist and true storyteller, which I would love both of those. Hopefully COVID ends and we can all go see you do those things.
I hope so too, yes.
We're going to have a Q&A session at the end of Sarah's presentation. So at that time, we'll invite people to ask their questions on the stage, and I'll give directions on how to do that at that time. Or feel free to put stuff in the chat as we go, and I'll keep an eye on that. So thank you, Sarah, for sharing with us today, and I'm sure everyone's eager to get started, so I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my PowerPoint. Is that what you all are able to see?
Yes. And just a hint for people is if you want to maximize one of these little things that you see in the black screen, you can click on it twice.
Awesome. So welcome, everyone. My name is Sarah. I am a born and raised Virginian, although I'm itching to go somewhere new. My previous work experience, as we've mentioned, is in neuroscience and behavioral science research before I transitioned into my current role as a data analyst at UVA School of Education. I've also chosen to go back to school to get my master's in data science at UVA's online program after a long journey with clarity. So my ultimate ambition is to use data science to identify and mitigate societal gaps. Specifically, I'm interested in currently is mitigating knowledge gaps with women's health. So my intention for this presentation today is to help you gain this level of clarity in your path as well. So to start off, we're going to set just a working definition of what I believe clarity is. So clarity to me is an ongoing process of reflection and intuitive pivots to meet your goals and align with your path. In a practical sense, this is going to involve a lot of journaling, non-judgmental emotional work, planning and replanning the days and weeks of your months ahead. Utilizing clarity in your career or any life transition is a game changer, but you may have noticed that this is a lot of work. This may seem to be too big of a task if you're not someone who's regularly engaged with reflection, or we'll be doing an exercise later on that will help make this mountain into a molehill. But first, I just want to share some personal stories about clarity to help you see where inspiration can be found within your life. So one of my favorite mentors in my life has been my grandfather. Grandpa, until he got a dementia diagnosis, has always been a crass old man that cussed a lot, but always took me out for ice cream. He taught me my times tables in 3rd grade, which isn't really as charming as it sounds because he got frustrated a lot and I'm terrible at memorization. Even still, when I was chosen to be an accelerated math program in the same year, he was the only person in my life that made me feel that it was okay that I couldn't comprehend why there were letters in math problems. I treasure our relationship and love listening to him tell stories about going to college, playing baseball, and meeting my grandmother. But the story that always stuck with me was when he would talk about living on a farm in Mississippi. And even though for many years he thought and worked really hard to become a school teacher, well, as he said, he just kept coming back to how does that dang light switch work? Grandpa went back to college after serving in the Korean War to become an electrical engineer. When he moved up to Virginia, was able to work on one of the federal government's first computers. A piece I want to highlight for you as a takeaway is that the insights you get may not be loud, but they may just be these nagging curiosities. Another significant mentor in my life has been Dr. Rosalind Moran. Rosalind is a Dublin native that adores President Barack Obama and is always dressed to the nines. I worked with Rosalind in my first job after college as a research coordinator. She gave me a lot of autonomy, research opportunities, and invested a ton of time in helping me find my path. Rosalind's lab was a memory and neuroimaging research lab. I was responsible for recruiting patients as well as healthy older adults to participate in research studies that involved them climbing into an MRI scanner and looking at images of scenes or household items on a screen. Our team would record what was happening in their brains as they encoded these images, and about an hour after they got out of the scanner, we would ask them to look at the images again and tell us which ones they remembered and which ones they did not. This would allow us to know what was going on inside their brains when they remembered these images or when they forgot the images. Rosalind and I were sitting in her office one afternoon analyzing data. MRI images often take a few minutes to process, and we were watching the progress bar tick closer to 100% when she, out of nowhere, just said, "I wish I could spend all of my time working with data." There's something about the sincerity in her voice that stuck with me. It's moments like these where you are so genuinely at peace with the process of something, when you're able to create this flow state. Those are the moments we should listen for to get insights about how to walk along the least winding path. I love graphics like these, where a person emphasizes that growth is not a linear process. And while I completely agree, I want to emphasize that there are some turns and twists that you can avoid if you're listening closely. Now that you're aware of some insights and where they may come from, I want to lead us into a clarity exercise. So the intention of this exercise is to come at your future through the framework of the rest of your life. The reason for this is because I believe that a more sustainable journey to success is to account for your life when setting intentions about your career, instead of coming at your career to fit your life around. So this exercise, I've adapted from a podcast from Rachel Hollis. Rachel Hollis is a motivational speaker and lifestyle blogger who in the podcast takes you through a goal-setting exercise where you set 10 goals for the next 10 years, and then you find one to focus on right now. Today, we're not going to be setting any goals. In this exercise, we're only going to be dreaming. We're not setting any plans. So to start, I'll ask you to grab a piece of paper and a pen. It can be a sticky note or even a tissue. You can also just pull up a little text file as well. Secondly, what I'll ask you to do is to choose a time frame. So I recommend you choose a time frame of either 3, 5, or 10 years. So typically, if you have goals set for the upcoming future, I would challenge you to go out to 10 years. If you have a vague sense in your mind that you want to go, start a business in 10 years, or in 10 years you'll have tenure, or some grand goal that you've already set for yourself in 10 years, I would do steps a little closer. For me, I typically struggle with the midpoint. So I typically have a plan for like 10 years from now, I have this grand idea. In 3 years, I have these steps that I'll do. So 5 years is typically the hardest for me. So I recommend you pick one of those. What I'll then ask you to do is at the top of your paper, write November 12th, and then the year that you have chosen. And then we'll dive into calculating your age and then the ages of 3 family members or friends that you have close to you. Now I want you to pick someone that you're close enough to that you know their age, so it'll be easy to calculate. And I'll give you all just a few moments to do that. The purpose of this is just to create an intention and set a framework around in mind of the time frame that you've selected. So it's easier to imagine if you actually sit and think about, I'm 29, in 3 years I'll be 32. What will life look like at 32? Awesome. So now that you've selected your time frame and you've thought about, what life would look like and the people around you will look like during that time, I want to go ahead and get started. So what I'll ask us to do before we dive straight in is I'm going to lead us through just a few breaths to get us centered so that we come from a place of mindfulness. I'm going to be asking in this exercise just a series of questions, and I want you to just think through the questions. You may feel led to open your eyes and then go ahead and jot down some answers. If you don't, feel free to sit with your eyes closed. All right, so to get started, I'll ask you to go ahead and close your eyes. Make any adjustments you need to sit comfortably with both of your feet resting flat on the floor. Hold your arms in a way that makes you feel weightless. This may be with your arms on the chair arms or in your lap, whichever feels relaxed to you. Go ahead and give your shoulders a roll and your neck a few rolls as well, and settle in. We're going to take a deep breath in and out. I'll ask you to release your facial muscles and unclench your jaw. And a deep breath in and out. One more in and out. So take a moment to be in your body. Mentally note anything that came up. Maybe you're noticing your back's a little sore, or maybe you notice you're not sitting as comfortably as you thought. Just notice these things, and if you feel led to make some adjustments, please do. Now, I want you to imagine that you are within the time frame that you've selected. It's now November 12th in whatever year, and you are living at the best possible version of yourself. Don't overthink it. Just allow yourself to envision the most marvelous version of your life without limits. What do you look like? How do you spend your time? How do you start your day? How do you speak to others? And how do they speak to you in return? Be as specific as possible. What kind of clothes are you wearing? What kind of car do you drive? What hobbies have you started or perfected in this time? Where do you go on vacation? Are you happy, energetic, optimistic? What is your relationship like with your family? Do you own a home that's within walking distance of your favorite coffee shop? Do you have kids? And if you do they live with you, or are they grown now? Do you read, or do you love to run? What kind of friends do you have? How did you meet those friends? Through work, hobbies, or your partner? How do you manage your stress? What is the best of the best? What is a bigger version of the best version of you? What is the highest value that your future self holds? Is it family, loyalty, growth, equity, knowledge, education, vulnerability? Now let's go a little bit deeper. What career best fits the life that you just created for yourself? What does it feel like to go through your day? Do you feel empowered, creative, and of service in your workplace? Where do you see room for your ambitions or growth? And how are you providing that space for your colleagues as well? Do you work from home? Or maybe you're in a trendy office with the brightest minds of our time. What projects are you working on? What problems are you trying to solve? As specifically as possible, imagine the technology that you see and create every day. What platforms and languages are you using? Do you work in a team of people who are similar to you, or are you the only technical person in the room? How do you lead? Do others come to you for your expertise? How much money are you making? What skills have you developed, and which are you still developing? If you haven't already, open your eyes. I hope you're starting to feel some creative juices flowing and starting to get some insights into your path. For the next few minutes, you can continue writing if these ideas are still coming to you. And while you're writing, I'm going to share my personal story. So I was raised to value education. Both my parents have graduate degrees, and my dad finished his PhD in computer science when I was just in 7th grade. When his diploma finally came in and we got the chance to show it off to our grandparents, they were overwhelmed with pride, and everyone I knew was impressed. I wanted so badly for this to be me. I wanted so badly for my family to be impressed with something I put hard work into and had a tangible thing to show them. So in that moment, I decided I would get a PhD. The only question was, what in? While attending Christopher Newport University, I discovered a passion for neuroscience and neuroscience research. I love the creativity and simultaneous rigor of research. I was still undecided about what specific field I wanted to go into, so I decided to go into a post-bac program with Dr. Rosalind Moran. It was in this program that I discovered how much I loved what we were doing. I loved working with older adults, I loved working in the field of memory, and I loved working for a female mentor. So when it came time to apply to PhD programs, I specifically asked Rosalind, who was doing similar work to us that was outside of the US. She let me know that Dr. Alexis Markham was doing similar work to us at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. So I prepped an email for Dr. Markham, and the next thing I knew, we were on a Skype call where she told me that I was the most qualified PhD candidate she had ever interviewed. Everything seemed to be falling into place as I prepped my application for the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. About 4 weeks after I had submitted my application, I had a meeting with Rosalind, and in her office, she welcomed me by congratulating me that I would be attending the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. She was beaming with enthusiasm, but I was not. My first thought was, how am I going to pay for this? It's not official yet. I don't even own a passport. The hesitancy was welling up inside of me. It took about 2 weeks for me to get the official acceptance letter, and I immediately emailed Dr. Markham and asked if I could delay 1 year to apply to funding opportunities. She politely accepted and sent along a few links for me to dive into. Over the course of the next year, I applied to 5 funding opportunities. I had perfectly crafted this opportunity where I would spend 3 years at the University of Edinburgh. I would travel in the final year to the University of Cambridge to study under some of the most innovative researchers in neuroimaging. All of the funding applications I sent in were rejected. But the one thing the year did give me was time to realize that it didn't matter why I fought for so long and so hard for this opportunity that I actually didn't want in the end. So in September 2017, I moved to Charlottesville, Virginia, and I took a job at UVA working for a research team in the medical school. But I still felt really disappointed and embarrassed that I had turned down such an amazing opportunity. And it especially stung that I was still working in academia. I was still interacting with people with PhDs and PhD students every day. I felt really lost, and I didn't really know what to do after that. The following year, a friend of mine invited me to her wedding in the UK. I asked my friend Lindsay if she would go with me, and we planned out this elaborate trip where we ended by visiting Edinburgh. The wedding was absolutely beautiful, and it was a pleasure to attend. A few people asked us about our trip to Scotland and really hyped up how beautiful the city was, and Edinburgh did not disappoint. The moment I stepped out of the train station, I was overwhelmed with the feeling that I was finally home. Over the next few days, we toured the Highlands and the underground city, and when we finally made it to the castle, Lindsay and I were at the highest point when she looked at me and said, "If you're not moving here, I will." And I just went, right. The whole trip, I was simultaneously in pure bliss and hating myself for throwing away such an amazing opportunity. At this point in my journey, I had decided I wanted to become a data scientist, and I told Lindsay at the top of the Edinburgh Castle, which is pictured here, looking over the city, if the University of Edinburgh had a data science program, I was attending it. And as soon as we returned home, I wrote my first ever 3-year plan. It was specifically structured around the University of Edinburgh's data science program. At the time, they started in September, and the program graduated in August. I knew that I needed to complete some prerequisites, so for the first year of the program, the first year of my 3-year plan, I was going to complete linear algebra and calculus. The second year of the program, I dedicated to applying to programs and hopefully starting one. And once I got my applications in, I wanted to focus on building my skills with Python and R. It was in the final year that I would complete the master's program, in addition to volunteering or having a paid opportunity where I could gain experience as well. And finally, I wanted to volunteer with a group that focused on women in STEM. I'm happy to report that the first year went exactly as planned. And when I stepped into the second year, I began looking at other programs as backups to the University of Edinburgh. I stumbled across UVA's online program, and before I was consciously aware of it, I requested more information and scheduled a phone call with Sarah Kelly at UVA School of Data Science. I was sitting on the front steps of Cobb Hall outside of my office when Sarah explained that the purpose and the practicality of UVA's online data science program. I would be able to keep my current job and attend one of the most prestigious data science programs in the country. There was no decision to be made. I applied to UVA's online data science program and nowhere else. It was a fast 8 weeks of recruiting every person in my life willing to help me write or review my personal statements and craft all my recommendation letters. It was a very slow 6 weeks of worrying, refreshing emails, and sleepless nights. But finally, I was accepted. And I can proudly report that my graduation date is August 2021, which is still within the timeline of my 3-year plan. This illustrates, the illustration I want to paint for you is that this process of clarity is ongoing. The insights today will help you get to the next step of your goal, but the goals and the insights may not actually be the destination intended for you. My desire to get a PhD and attend the University of Edinburgh were exactly the 2 pieces that positioned me to finding UVA's online program. This is what I meant earlier when I said that there are some twists and turns that you could avoid. By listening to my hesitation about the PhD program, I didn't blindly follow a goal. I had let myself believe. And at the time that I was accepted, I was able to celebrate with everyone I wanted to. So now you can tell that I love storytelling, and I want to leave you with just some recommendations, practical advice, and just some food for thought in establishing and maintaining a habit of clarity in your own life. So first, identifying mentors and why you resonate with them. So even if you feel you don't have mentors, there are people in your life that you look up to, and really honing in on why you look up to them is important. I really like guided purpose meditations. I use YouTube a lot for this, and the Honest Guys have a good YouTube video. Free journaling. So I do this every morning to kind of clear the first thoughts of my day and get the worries out before I actually start any sort of process. This is especially helpful in COVID, where I'm constantly having these COVID stress dreams of like, I'm doing a normal thing, and then all of a sudden I'm like, wait, I'm not wearing a mask. And so just kind of processing through those first thing in the morning kind of clears it out so I can focus on my day. And then guided journaling is the last piece. So this I borrowed from Brendon Burchard, whose book I'll mention later on, but he has a section in his book on clarity and recommends that you do some guided journaling with these questions or something similar, either daily or monthly. So personally, I have some book recommendations. I mentioned Brendon Burchard's book, High Performance Habits. So this goes into in-depth clarity. It has some great vignettes on other people's stories as well as getting into some like research-based topics of how clarity can benefit you. I personally really love this book. Thanks for the feedback. It really opened my eyes to the idea that the quality of the feedback isn't actually coming from the giver, but how the receiver receives the feedback. And it's actually incredibly helpful to break down pieces of feedback and help you understand like what someone's saying when they say something that seems maybe passive aggressive. But it's helped me a ton, especially breaking into a new field from neuroscience to data science. And then finally, I recently just read In the Flow, and it's a biohacking book based around the female biology and breaking from the 24-hour cycle and just kind of helping women or even just feminine energy to have a deeper level of productivity and clarity as well. And lastly, in a last-ditch effort to convince you how helpful clarity can be in your life, I wanted to share just a short video of an astrophysics conference where Neil deGrasse Tyson was on a panel, and the panel was asked, "What's up with chicks in science?" And let me know if you all aren't able to hear this.
I'm not hearing anything.
Explain why.
Is that better?
Anyone want to touch that? I've never been female, but I have been black my whole life, and so let me perhaps offer some insight from that perspective, because there are many similar social issues related to access to equal opportunity. that we find in the Black community as well as the community of women in a white male-dominated society. And I'll be brief because I want to try to get more questions. When I look at throughout my life, I've known that I wanted to do astrophysics since I was 9 years old. A first visit to the Hague Planetarium. I was a little younger than Victor at the time. I was, although he did it before I did. And so I got to see how the world around me reacted to my expression of these ambitions. And all I can say is the fact that I wanted to be a scientist and astrophysicist was hands down the path of most resistance through the forces of nature and forces of society. Anytime I expressed this interest, teachers would say, don't you want to be an athlete? Or don't you want to? I want to become something that was outside of the paradigms of expectation of the people in power. And so fortunately, my depth of interest with the universe was so deep and so fuel enriched that every one of these curveballs that I was thrown in, fences built in front of me, and hills that I had to climb, I just reached for more fuel and I kept going. Now here I am, one of the most visible scientists in the land, and I want to look behind me and say, well, where are the others who might have been this? And they're not there. And I wonder what is the blood on the tracks that I happened to survive that others did not, simply because the forces of society that prevented at every turn, to the point where I have security guards following me as I go through department stores, presuming that I'm a thief. I walked out of a store one time and the alarm went off, and so they came running to me. I walked through the gate. At the same time, a white male walked through the gate, and that guy just walked off with the stolen goods, knowing that they would have stopped me and not him. That's an interesting sort of the exploitation of this. What a scam that was. I think people should do that more often. All right. So my life experience tells me that when you don't find blacks in the sciences, you don't find women in the sciences, I know that these forces are real, and I had to survive them in order to get where I am today. So before we start talking about genetic differences, you got to come up with a system where there's equal opportunity. Then we can have that conversation.
What I love about Neil's response is how he expresses how clarity is what kept him focused on astrophysics when people were giving these unsolicited opinions and basically discrimination. We won't be able to change the way that people perceive us, but we can change how it affects us or doesn't affect us. And when we maintain clarity, we are setting up ourselves to follow the path that is designed to us, and the opinions of others won't seemingly matter. And
we learned so much questions.
At this point, I will be happy to take your questions.
Thank you. If anyone has a question, are you hearing an echo? Okay, well, maybe it's sounds like it stopped now. If you have questions, there are two ways you can ask them. Either click the Ask to Share Audio and Video button that's on the upper right of the kind of stage area of your screen, or feel free to put something into the chat. So Sarah, I have one question. This is maybe related to clarity, but it sounded like you had a strong passion for Edinburgh, but so far I haven't ended up there. Are you planning a career direction that might take you there?
Yeah, I think the interesting part of that was that I don't really have that passion anymore. Like it was so strong for so long. And I remember like I would go on walks, like even around Charlottesville, and I would just like daydream about being in Edinburgh. But it just, I think it was truly just the thing that was getting me to the next step. And so I love the city and will probably travel there many times in my life, but it's just not something that really sits on my heart as strongly as it used to.
So fate took you there to get you to a further point on your journey.
Yeah, that's what I believe.
So the questions that you were sharing with us when we were doing the meditation exercise at the beginning, there are a lot of them. I had a hard time keeping up. Is there somewhere that we can find those questions if we wanted to kind of go back and revisit and kind of work through some of those?
Yeah, so that's been my trouble too. So I kind of adapted some of the beginning questions from Rachel Hollis's podcast, which is available on Spotify. And I can put a link in the chat actually to the actual podcast itself. It's episode 72, but she basically goes through kind of the first half of it. And then the second half was what I added on that was just kind of more career focused. And so I think, you know, in my experience, it's been like I have previously focused a lot on building my kind of life around my career. And I've more recently realized that I don't kind of want to work 50 hours a week and dedicate, you know, trying to figure out like, how am I going to see my parents this weekend and how am I going to do this and this and this and fit it kind of around my work schedule. I wanted to kind of build a life around or build a career around my life and help it kind of cultivate the experience that I wanted. And so that was my intention of just kind of sticking that on at the end of like not asking a lot of career questions in the beginning. But the podcast goes through it very quickly as well. And but basically what I did, there's like a 3-minute segment where she asks all the questions and I just replay it until I'm done.
That's great. And on the guided journaling, what was that? Can you just repeat that? Was that in from one of the books that you mentioned?
Yeah, so that one's from Brendon Burchard's High Performance Habits book. So the book, I'm forgetting the other habits that he talks about, but one of the first ones he goes over is clarity and just how the more high-performing CEOs that he did a big research study on high-performing CEOs, I think all over the world, but I'm not quite sure, and found that there's like these 6 habits that all of them have, one of them including clarity. And he recommends using clarity like on a daily basis and a monthly basis to ask yourselves these sort of questions. And so one of the big ones is just kind of like, how do you want to show up in the world? So how do you want to show up for a particular meeting or a particular day? Or even just like how you want to show up for that month. So just kind of taking the time out to just journal about, you know, do I want to show up with a sense of purpose? Do I want to show up with a listening ear? Do I want to show up as someone more assertive in this meeting because we've had problems with this collaborator or that sort of thing? So just being really intentional about like what you want to do and how.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it sounds like it's kind of a reflective step in identifying what it is you'd like to do, and then a planning step in identifying what actions you think would help get you closer to that place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure there's tons of more resources online as well for those sorts of guided journaling. And I know that like I got Michelle Obama had with her book Becoming, she had a Becoming journal as well. And it just has a bunch of journal prompts and they're very reflective as well of like creating your own story from previous experiences and just kind of asking about your background and your family. And that's a good one too, to kind of process through things that you've experienced previously to maybe pull out those insights that you've had before, similar to the stories that I shared at the beginning.
I was intrigued. I haven't read the book In the Flow that you showed there, but I was intrigued by your description of it. And it sounds like it explores things that might be different for women than for men. Is that physiologically, or what is it that book dives into?
Yeah, so more specifically, it breaks down kind of what parts of like a woman's cycle they're better at certain tasks. So like in your follicular phase, which is right after you've had your period, you're typically much better at planning ahead and figuring out, like setting goals and planning out the entire month is kind of the goal for that. And then you jump into your ovulatory phase, which is when you're super social, and it would be really great to like schedule meetings at that time or like ask for a raise. And then it gets into the luteal phase, which is kind of when estrogen drops and progesterone spikes biologically. And so at that time, you're more dedicated to like focusing on tasks. And one of the things that it helped me with was realizing that I've kind of always been a planner. And then at some point, I feel overwhelmed with the things that I've planned, the goals that I've set, and I don't really know how to do them. And that's actually very typical of the luteal phase of a normal cycle, which is just like you've planned all these things, and then you get to the phase where you want to do them, and you realize you've overplanned. And so the first task of a luteal phase, if you know that this is what you're experiencing, is to like take 5 things off your list. But when you don't know this, it's a very stressful part, and you don't know why this keeps happening to you, kind of thing. So that was a good like biohack for me as well. But it's just, and she emphasizes in the book too that you don't have to follow, like if you're not a menstruating woman, like if you've experienced menopause or if you're transitioning or just identify as non-binary, you can still utilize these phases, but you can cycle them up with the moon phases. And so you can use this kind of, you know, phases of like, I'm going to plan during this phase, I'm going to be super social during this time, I'm going to be like really diligent and in the weeds for the luteal phase. And then I didn't mention, but the menstruation phase is just like rest, make sure you rest. Yeah. So just like having these sort of times of the month where you do different things so that you plan out rest a little better.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've heard a talk before about how different times of day affect your ability to do various excuse me, types of tasks. But I hadn't seen it taken to times of the month. So yeah, interesting how when you're talking about planning over the 10-year time horizon, the 5-year time horizon, the 3-year time horizon, it could also be the 30-day time horizon,
yeah.
24-hour time horizon.
Yeah, for sure. And she touches in the book about the 24-hour calendar or cycle as well. Just saying that there is that same natural flow of things where we get up and we feel really energized, and then, you know, we eat breakfast, and then we like do sort of our meetings in the morning, and then we have lunch, and then we like do really diligent tasks in the afternoon, and then we rest in the evening. Just still following this same very like plan out your day, be social. It's very the similar flow, but just expanding it over a larger scale, because some days you are pulled to have meetings for 8 hours. And so just making sure that you have the energy to do that and also have time to rest as well.
No, that's fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting when we're reminded that we're actually creatures.
Yeah. That need rest and recovery for sure.
That's right. I wonder if there are any questions from anyone in the audience. Well, Sarah, thank you. That was a really fascinating conversation, and I really appreciate your sharing all of the story and the resources that you shared with us, and some of the techniques that I think we can all take and use those in our daily lives. And with that, just like to say one more thank you to Sarah. I really appreciate your talk, and I hope everybody has a good rest of their day. Thank you.
Thank you all.